Hey, what up, everybody? There you go. Hello, hello, hello. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Everybody, welcome back. Welcome back to the next session and section of Reading with SHILO, man. We are here tonight. We are here, man. Feeling like Horton. We are here. Where is my pencil, man? I'm short a pencil. Let's see if I can find me a pencil, man. All right, got me a pencil. Oh Lord, Miss Boxy. So yeah, we are here ready to jump into chapter 8. Let me get my pencil ready. Not jump into chapter 8. We're ready to jump into section 2 of chapter 8. Section 2 of chapter 8, man, which is a long section. Section 2 is a mighty long section. So I'm going to break it up into 2 parts because I don't feel like reading all that stuff tonight. Not tonight. But just to keep, it going, let's keep it going. Let's keep it moving. We'll go ahead and hit up the first section. I'll read about 5. It's like, it has 11-page chapter 8. Section 2 of chapter 8 has like 12 pages. So I'll break it up into about 5 or 6 pages, most likely 5. We'll see how it goes. 5 pages of section 2 of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins. Look at that boy. Get your finger out your mouth. Get your finger out your nose, my bad. Get your finger out your nose. That boy digging for gold. But a history of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock, man. From slavery to Chris Rock. And we're moving along with this big ass book. This big ass book with all this information and words that, oh Lord, I find daunting at times. But it's all great. It's all great. Because these are the trials and the tribulations when you're trying to move forward, onward and upward to advance your vocabulary, your mind frame. You're going to come across some things that you don't know, some things that might hit you. So, but you just got to push through. Gotta push through. Yeah, I don't want to be late out here tonight. So, section 2. Let's get into it. Section 2 of chapter 8. Chapter 8: Race Records and Black Films. Race Records and Black Films. And when we read section 1, they were doing a lot of, I guess you could say, keeping black folk down throughout the using the different media outlets, such as television, because they weren't having a lot of shows on until later on, coming closer to the 20th century. Then they started having more black shows with full black casts that let the comedians and entertainers, actors, singers, so on and so forth, to be a little bit more loose or uninhibited, as the words they would use, uninhibited within some of the things they were trying to do, which and some of them being they were trying to revamped the image that had been portrayed in so-called nigga music. Also been portrayed in the minstrelsies, the variety shows, the vaudeville shows. So even some of the Broadway plays, still had idiotic, inept acting, to try to portray them as inferior to uh, at the time, the master race at the time here in America. So, but it gave a lot of info, a lot of information on a lot of different names that, man, you might do well to look at, and we're getting up to the time period where I'm alive, or I remember here, Red Fox, Martin Lawrence, Bill Cosby, to name a few. To name a few of the ones that are coming into the prominent figureheads of this chapter. I would say this chapter most likely going to be from this chapter on. We're most likely going to be reading about more up to date stuff that a lot of people should know. So let me see one. Poem. Yeah, man, I'm going to read from page 340 to 349. 340 or 348. Now I'll read to 349. 349, and let me put my little marker where I'm going to stop. All right. So I'll read about 4-5 pages. So here we go, man. Section 2. Section 2 of Chapter 8 of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins. Initially, films made primarily for African American audiences purposefully avoided humorous depictions of blacks. Although Bill Foster produced The Railroad Porter around 1912, and Burt Williams filmed Darktown Jubilee in 1914, the effective impetus for the production of black films was the controversy surrounding D.W. Griffin's The Birth of a Nation in 1914. The furor forced black leaders to look more closely at the effect Hollywood's depictions of blacks had on the larger society's perception of racial differences, and it roused enough interest to initiate plans for a film that would counter Griffin's scandalous portrait of Black America. Emmett J. Scott, a former journalist and Booker T. Washington's secretary at Tuskegee Institute, until the educator's death in 1915, led the attempt to form a black film company and produce a movie that rectified the distortions of The Birth of a Nation. With the backing of the NAACP, the Universal Pictures, which matched funds derived from selling stock in the project to black businessmen, Scott put together a coalition that included scholars and a veteran screenwriter, and set out to produce Lincoln's Dream, initially conceived as a short that might be appended to Griffin's film. Aspirations expanded, however, and eventually Scott's group decided to produce a feature movie. Internal disagreements and the defection of Universal as a backer impeded the project, but after 3 years, Scott managed to release Birth of a Race in 1918 or in 1919. Oh. Unfortunately, it was an unfocused, rambling film that bore little resemblance to its creator's original conception. A financial and critical failure, the movie dropped out of sight shortly after a widely ballyhooed Chicago premiere. During the time that Scott's movie was being filmed, several more successful black companies were founded. Actor Noble Johnson and his brother George formed the Lincoln Motion Picture Company in 1916, and during the next 6 or 7 years produced about 10 films. Like Scott, the Johnsons were intent upon making motion pictures that countered the prevailing image of blacks as laggards and comic buffoons. Their films were largely devoid of humor, instead, echoing America's popular Horatio Alger myth. The Lincoln Company turned out a series of movies that focused on African American achievement and conclusive and consciously depicted black men and women who might be seen as heroes or heroines in the community. Among the titles were The Realization of the Negro Ambition in 1917, Trooper Kate in 1920, and By Birthright in 1921. With Noble Johnson starring in many of the Lincoln films, they were in a distinct improvement over Scott's effect, although still substandard by Hollywood criteria. Ultimately, distribution problems and pressure from Universal Pictures, where Noble Johnson was maintained as a supporting player until the late 40s, doomed the company. Traverse Spiggins also began his Douglas Film Company in the late teens, and, like the Johnsons, set out to produce uplifting films that depicted the Negro in a less demeaning manner than Hollywood had. Their releases included Paul Lawrence Dunbar's The Scapegoat in 1920. The Harlem-based Real Motion Picture Company followed the same pattern. Backed by Robert Levy, the company employed performers from the Lafayette Players and included among their titles Dunbar's Sport of the Gods in 1923. There was also Ebony Films, a Chicago-based company presumably headed by J. Luther Pollard. But Pollard didn't share the others. My bad. Excuse me. But Pollard didn't share the others' dedication to serious black films. His company turned out standard blackface comedies such as Spying the Spy in 1917 and Black Sherlock Holmes, Undated, both of which presented comic Negro adaptations of mainstream storylines in which the humor turned on basic coon antics. By the time Lincoln folded in the early 20s, these and many other smaller black companies were struggling to compete in a rapidly expanding industry. Race films were being viewed as viable commercial products not only by blacks, but also by independent white filmmakers and Hollywood. Black films like Race Records, which emerged at about the same time, were slowly but inevitably falling under the control of non-black interests. Independent white-owned companies soon began dominating the market, and by the late 20s, at least 30 black film production companies were operating, many of them controlled by whites. With more than 700 movie houses in black communities and black audiences starved for representation on the screen, race films had been transformed from the minority operation inspired by a desire to rectify distorted images of Afro-Americans to a larger commercial endeavor that often exploited the same stereotypes established in Hollywood movies. Remarkably, one independent black filmmaker survived the takeover of race movies and continued to produce motion pictures until the 40s. Oscar Micheaux, Micheaux. I know that AUX down here, we pronounce it Bo, or O. It's an O sound. Mako. Oscar Mako, who was born in Illinois in 1849 and drifted to South Dakota, where he was a porter, a farmer, a rancher, and novelist before turning to motion pictures, came to the film business with an inventiveness, determination, and con man spirit that set him apart and sustained him when most other blacks succumbed to its harsh realities. Lorenzo Tucker, the leading man that McCoy dubbed the Black Valentino, submitted that he was so impressive and charming that he could talk his shirt off your back. The historian Thomas Cripps notes that McCoy attempted to join the Lincoln Company in 1919, but the Johnsons considered him an upstart, a mountebank, and an untrustworthy hustler. Undeterred, McCoy released his first featured film, The Homesteader, that same year and used his unconventional approach and knack for self-promotion to produce over 30 films during the next 3 decades. At least 10 films a year if you go that route. As dancer Honey Coles recalled, McCoy would walk into a place and take his camera out and start rolling without asking anybody. Next thing you knew, you were in a picture somewhere, but nobody seemed to mind. He was his own writer, his own choreographer, his own cameraman. I can't think of anything he didn't do. Notwithstanding his impromptu techniques, shoestring buttons, and frequent use of amateur actors along with professionals from Hollywood, Broadway, and groups like Harlem's Lafayette Players, McCoy was able to produce a formidable list of surprisingly adept films. Much of his success can be attributed to the distributing and marketing tact that was as unorthodox as his filmmaking techniques. Using the grassroots approach he had developed while promoting and distributing novels he had wrote and published, McCoy traveled throughout the country, meeting prominent people in the Black community and lecturing at schools and churches, where he also met the working class. Carrying stills from the new movie, he would visit white and Black-owned theaters in the Black Belt and convince owners to book his films, or, in some instances, persuade them to finance projects that were not yet completed. Flamboyant, irrepressible, and endowed with not just a little of the trickster's instinct, McCoy was the only independent Black filmmaker who, generally without the backing and consequent influence of whites, was able to produce a substantial film over. Let's see what it is. Let's see if I'm pronouncing it right. OEUVRE. I'm gonna say over. Over or Uver. Uvery. Watch it be something like that. Something crazy. Come on, sucker. OEUVRE. OEURVRE. The works of a painter, a composer, and author regarding collectivity. Over. He produced a substantial film over the work of a composer, a painter, or an author regarded collectively. The complete oeuvre of Mozart, the complete oeuvre of McCoy. His career spanned the silent and sound film movie ears, and according to Donald Bogle, although the films were technically inferior and the acting could be dreadful, they were similar to the Hollywood product and resembled the best B pictures of its time. McCoy, like the 80s maverick Black filmmaker Spike Lee, displayed an eclecticism that often moved beyond the usual concerns of race movies. Although he dutifully produced Negro uplift movies such as Birthright 1924 and engaged a popular theme of passing for the white and God's stepchildren in 1938, McCoy also ventured into terrain that was alien to most race movies. His controversial Within Our Gate in 1920 dramatized an anti-Semitic lynching. The symbol of the unconquered in 1921 focused on the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan, and Murder in Harlem in 1935 dealt with the legal injustices and the threat of lynching that arose when a black man was accused of killing a white secretary. Without timidity, he often filmed the unnameable, the arcane, disturbing things that set black against black, among them interracial color prejudice and the deleterious influence of the neighbors' racket of black communities. Generally, like other black filmmakers of the period, McCoe avoided focusing on the humorous depiction of Negroes. He concentrated on the problems and concerns of the black middle class and largely avoided the rural buffoons and clowns that dominated Hollywood's depiction of blacks. According to Lorenzo Tucker, he didn't lean toward comedy and didn't get or go too much for dialect. Still, there was a small white audience that frequented race movies, and McCoe was aware of their expectations as well as the black common man's fondness for the ethnic humor that dominated the black stage circuit. Moreover, he was not above appealing to those audiences. He clearly inserted into almost all his films raunchy cabaret scenes that he knew would appeal to the whites. That impulse led him to include moments of unabashed minstrelsy in his films. 10 Minutes to Live or 10 Minutes to Live in 1932, for example, a movie set in a nightclub, includes a rare appearance of blackface actors in McCoe movies. Introduced as George and Gabby, two clownishly attired comedians, their ill-fitting clothes a brazen parody of the rural Negroes' attempt to affect urban decorum, appeared as part of the Variety Act, and although the bit contains a few veiled attacks on racial bigotry, it focuses primarily on time-worn minstrel banter. Comic 1. What you want to do is stop talking about going to jail. Uplift yourself, elevate, be somebody, following the footsteps of great men. Comic 2. Now, what the use of me being somebody and elevating? What good is it going to do me? I want to go somewhere I can eat. Comic 1. Well, that's all right. If you elevate, then you can eat. I can even join the fresh air camp, but that don't mean nothing to me now. Give me less liberty and more food. Got a whole lot of freedom and starving to death. You ought to be satisfied. I never will forget the words my grandmother used to tell me when I was a little boy. She used to hold me on her lap and look into my big blue eyes. She pushed my golden locks back from my forehead and said, "Son, my darling son, where there's a will, there's a way." She was right. I got a will to eat, but I can find a way. Keep on looking, you'll find it. But now, since you said that, elevation, that's something good. We ought to do that. Get out of the gutter and step on the sidewalk. Now you're talking. Following the footsteps of a great man. Oh, yeah. Men like Booker T. Washington. Now, that's a great man. That's a man whose name is known everywhere. Oh, yeah. The children knows him. His picture is in the books and papers. Why? Because he was a man that done something. Yeah. What did he do? I don't know. But whatever it was, he done it. Well, yeah. And look at that other great man. Who was that? That great soldier. Well, who? Frederick Douglass put his guns on his shoulder, walked out on that battlefield and said, "Give me liberty or shoot me." Uh-oh. And they shot him. What? But there's a man who, Abraham Lincoln. That's a great boy. Now, that's a man that knows everywhere too. Sure, he was a man that done something. Yeah, that's the boy that cut down his Papa cherry tree. Looks at his partner with utter stupefaction. In this instance, the choice of performers probably reflects McColl's attempt to attract white audiences since, despite its similarity to some classic black comic routines, the comedy is firmly based in the demeaning minstrel mode where humor is derived almost solely from the character's naivety and ignorance, particularly about their own racial heroes. A close look at the scene reveals that even the black actors portraying patrons at the cabaret are uncomfortable. Although other such examples can be found in McCall movies, usually they were not so graciously very heavy-handed. In Birthright, for instance, satire at the expense of some backward rural character is partially justified by their resistance to the returning college-educated hero's attempt to uplift his race. In other films, McCoy offered some examples of authentic black stage humor that were rarely seen in motion pictures or, in fact, any mainstream outlets. The surprisingly whimsical Darktown Review in 1931, for instance, contrast scenes depicting a staid, Borgia's Daniel Haywood choir singing such tunes as Is That Religion? And Ain't That a Shame? Not the Fats Domino version, with two classic examples of black ethnic humor. In one scene, the legendary Tim Moore appears with Andrew Tribal in a spirited dialogue involving the big lie, Ghost, and several other comedy standbys. Tribal. It's going to be this, what I'm about to read, so I don't have to keep reading between the two, Tribal and Moore. It is for like 2 pages, 3 pages. It's a back and forth between Tribal and Moore. And I guess it's from the Darktown Review. Tribal. I'll do the first two so you'll know the difference. Tribal. The island queen come in this morning. Let's go down to the levee and see what she brought in. Moore. Yeah, you can go to the levee if you want to. I was down there yesterday morning and got insulted. Who insulted you? When that boat pulled in, out of all them folks standing around on the levee, the man had to come off the boat and walk up and insult me. How he insult you? Ask me, how did I want to work? The story takes a different turn here as Moore explains what happened after he stumbled into a haunted house. I was scared to stay in and I was scared to come out. I know there was a ghost in that house. How'd you know it? Because it was chilly in there, and I thought I'd build me a fire. I looked down at the fireplace, and there was wood and shavings all ready to be lit. I reached up on the mantelpiece and got a match. Just as I went to light the wood and shavings disappeared. Wasn't no wood, and there wasn't no shavings. Live coals burning on the grate, red hot. What kind of grate was that? Red hot and steady heating. And that ain't all. I could see them coals moving around. All at once, this little kitty come crawling out them hot coals. Out the hot coals, a little tiny kitty come out them hot coals. Turned around and ate some death fire and sat there and laughed at me. Ah, ha, just like that. Boy, I don't blame that cat for laughing. Because that's the first time I seen you like to laugh myself to death. And boy, that cat had on a bathing suit and got up on the edge of the fire and dived down into my coals. And when he came up, he had a tuxedo and come here talking Polish to me. What kind of cat was that? A polecat, you fool. That boy, that cat got big as a mule and turned around and told me to shut up. Then started over where I was. And that's when it happened. And that's when what happened? That's when the window got broke out and the blind got knocked off. You don't mean to stood up and tell me that you come through that window? I didn't go around it. All I remember was I started at the window, was in my way. And boy, if I had a messed that window, that wall would have been ruined. How come you ain't leave that house in such undignified manner? Why didn't you use the door? The door? You showing your ignorance now. Is you ever been at any school outside the reform school? Well, yeah. Well, in school, did you take up any kind of manual training? Well, yeah. Did you study woodwork? Well, yeah. Well, in your studies at woodwork, did you take up windery or doory? Nah, you don't take them. Nah, but you know a couple of carpenters and architects are too. Yeah. Well, the next carpenter you see, you ask him, and he'll explain to you about doors. He'll tell you that a door was made for folks what had a lot of time. But when that cat spoke to me, yeah, by me being punctual, my time there was up. And right then, that window got well. What do you mean that window got well? It got rid of its pain. The film also includes a comic routine rarely seen outside Black communities, a parody of a black jackleg preacher in which the comedian Eamon Davis reduces the sermon to the most basic element of language, the alphabet. Davis, in the top hat, tails, and blackface makeup, drags the podium onto the stage and commences the routine with, brothers and sisters, seems as though the congregation is a little bit stiff this evening. Seems as though the contribution box is sadly regressing. I got a few announcements to make here this evening. After some familiar folderol about meeting at the sister's Chickenfoot's house, the acceptability of pints as a contribution and such, Amma proceeds to the meat of his routine. Looking down on page 202 to 2, we find here where it says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, elemental P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, H, I, J, K, I, J, K, L, M, L, M. Now there's the question. L, M, elemental P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Now, ain't that a glorious feeling? I say ABC with appropriate gestures, exclamations, and punctuations of the voice and the tonal delivery. Davis presents a dramatic send-up that hilariously captures every nuance of the rural preacher's sermonic presentation. Difficult to recreate in print. The routine depends almost entirely on intonation and gesticulation to drive home the satire. It is similar to the Richard Pryor Our Text for Today routine, in which the comedian delivers the following sermon. Let us turn our text to the Book of Wonder, where it says, a boy was born in hard times, Mississippi, surrounded by four walls that was not pretty. His parents, that's two people, gives him love and affection, just to keep it strong, moving in the right direction. Give him just enough. I said just enough for the city. Pryor's routine also uses a sermonic presentation of non-religious texts, but the earlier bit, by reducing the verbal content to a fundamentally nonsensical recitation of the alphabet, stretches the parody further. It is a revealing example of the type of ethnic comedy that appeared on the stages of Black theaters. And while Davis dons blackface makeup and riddles the piece of the minstrel-like references and mispronunciations, Sister Chickenfoot, or a few announcements today, the use of the nonsensical, abstract text clearly confirms that the humor is intentional, a performance and not an instance of naivety or innate idiocy. The bit is the riotous example of the Black comedian cleverly pushing his humor beyond the parameters of the limited areas in which many were forced to work. What I got? All right, I'll keep going because I'm supposed to stop right there. I'll keep going a couple more pages. That little city, got me wrong. In my city. Right. The early black filmmakers who, second to McCoy, most resisted white control of his films was Spencer Williams. Despite being an accomplished comedian and writer, he had performed and written for Paramount's Christie comedy series and later appeared as Amos on Amos and Andy. He usually focused on serious topics in the movies he produced in association with white producer Alfred Sack during the 40s. Now, Duke joined in 1947, a film that weaves the story of black family life in a small Texas town around a sketchy script featuring slapstick comedy and a generous dose of ethnic stage humor, was an exception. Comedians Julie Jones and Matt Moreland appeared with Williams, and at times the film offered examples of the street banter one might have heard at the jocular moment in the black barbershop. Williams, were you now following the advance of one of the finest men in America, Mr. Horace Greeley? Mr. Greeley said, "Go west, young man, and do your best. Then come east and spin your grease." Say, how come I can't go east and get my grease, then come back south and hush my mouth? I'm with you. On another occasion, Jones interrupts the solemn ritual of saying grace before the family dinner with, "Thank you, ladies, and if we able, we gonna eat everything that's on this table. And if there's ain't nothing left in the pot, bring it out while it's good and hot." Scenes such as these, in a different context, may have seemed self-deprecative. But in the setting dominated by pious, hardworking black folks, the facile street rap of Jones' character seemed merely an amusing interlude. Julie Jones, as teamed up with Williams in Beale Street Mama in 1946, as the title suggests, the film was a straight-out comic romp, and in the manner of Miller and Lyles and other black comic teams, Jones and Williams reenact many of the trickster and naive sidekick bits that were popular on stage. Ooh, shit. Almost knocked my cup down. As a filmmaker, however, Spencer Williams is better known as the brooding religious fantasy, Blood of Jesus in 1941, which, despite its technical deficiencies, is considered one of the most affecting depictions of Southern black church life in film. In that movie, as in Go Down Death in 1944, Of One Blood, Undated, and Dirty Gertie from Harlem, USA in 1946, his remake of Somerset Maugham's Reign, Williams concentrated on moral issues and religious themes, to the extent that they focus on the everyday problems of earnest, hardworking black people. Williams' serious films were more representative of independent race movies made by blacks than his comedies. They reflected the desire to establish a cinema image that countered mainstream's depiction of the happy-go-lucky musicians and dippy, self-effacing pranksters and sambos. Now, African Americans, however, seldom determined to thematic content of the race movies in which they were involved. The Lincoln Motion Picture Company, Oscar McCoy, the Douglas Film Company, the Rio Motion Picture Company, Spencer Williams, and a few smaller organizations, most of which produced only one or two films, were exceptions. The producer's ability to leave a personal imprint on their works usually resulted from their sheer tenacity and resolve or from self-financing. Others were not as successful. The raft of race movie companies that emerged in the 20s and nearly all those that surfaced during and after the Depression were completely controlled by whites, who sometimes employed black frontmen. Still, this arrangement did facilitate production of some exemplary black genre movies. Among the most accomplished were two films released by the Colored Players Company: 10 Nights in the Ballroom in 1926, which stars Charles Gilpin, and Scar of Shame in 1928, a film that effectively explored the color caste system among blacks. The Emperor Jones, 1933, which starred Paul Robeson and was produced independently and directed by Dudley Murphy. The Spirit of Youth. I wonder if Dudley Murphy, I wonder if that's kin to Eddie Murphy, or to the Murphys. I wonder if that's kin. The Spirit of the Youth in 1937, a drama about a rise of a young boxer, which starred Joe Louis and Clarence Muse, and Broken Strings in 1940, a drama about a concert violinist's conflict with his son, which also starred Clarence Muse and was probably the best of the lot. The success of these movies, notwithstanding the combination of white control and black performers, perpetuated the tendency to portray blacks in the established Hollywood mold and frequently gave credence to mainstream comic stereotypes that had little to do with the black community or its authentic inside humor. Now, non-black producers, after all, had their own entrenched ideas about what race movies should depict. According to James Murray, the film editor for Black Creation magazine, in a 1942 interview, Jack and Burt Goldberg, whose Herald Pictures, Hollywood Pictures, and Harlem Wood Company controlled much of the race movie industry, claimed all Negroes know it is that they want plenty of singing and dancing or drama depicting Negro life in typical Negro spirit. By 1947, Ted Toddy, whose Toddy Pictures had become a major producer and distributor of black films, insisted that Negro audiences did not care for the heavy emotional dramas. Their choice in film entertainment is the picture which features little light comedy, outdoor adventures, musical comedies with an abundance of singing, dancing, and comedy romances. These opinions were transformed into cinema reality and largely determined the content of race movies during the 40s. Shit, let me see. I could stop right though. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, don't see. Don't see. Significantly, despite disdain for the idea of producing genuine dramatic films for black audiences, these filmmakers often presented their comic and musical extravaganzas in the guise of drama. The result was a kind of cinema hybrid, black cast films that pretended to engage real situations, but were really actually vehicles for the music and comedy that producers assumed were the only entertainments black enjoyed. This compromised approach often resulted in films that not only distorted black humor, but also trivialized serious aspects of African American life. Worst in this regard were black cast dramatic productions that mimicked formulaic Hollywood genres such as westerns and gangster movies. Oh, Lord. Formulaic. Most of these films included black funny men whose role, as in Hollywood films, was to provide comic relief and validate the heroic or serious depiction of the film's star by acting out traditional coon behavior. Flower Noah Miller, Manton Moreland, Johnny Lee, Nicodemus Stewart, and Willie Best were among the comedians whose parts in these movies, although tempered by the all-black environment, were often reduced to eye-rolling, head-scratching, idiocy. As one film historian notes, the new generation of race movies revived interest in the genre precisely because they were like Hollywood movies. It could be added that the comedy in these films usually failed for exactly the same reason. They were, of course, exceptions. As mentioned in Chapter 6, Stephen Fetch's performance in Miracle on Harlem in 1947, released by Jack and Burt Goldberg's Herald Pictures, revealed a dimension of the comic shuffling darky caricature that was rarely seen in Hollywood's vehicles. Beware, in 1946, from Astor's Pictures, a company headed by white Southerners Robert Savany, although Newsweek criticized it as 55 minutes of heavy-handed melodrama, inexpertly directed, included songs that captured both Louis Jordan's infectious rhythm and blues beats and his flair for comic lyrics. Howdy Hope in 1947, released by Emmanuel Gluckman's All-American Company, was a musical with a gangster subplot. It also included Dusty Fletcher's rendition of the famous Open the Door Richard routine. The bit is much funnier on the screen than on record because much of its comic appeal depends on Fletcher's riotous slapstick antics. Dressed in a top hat, tattered oversized jacket, and the clown's patented floppy shoes, Fletcher literally stumbles onto the stage, reeling, falling, and bemoaning his state of total intoxication. You know, I ain't never drink no whiskey before. That won't let me go. That won't let you go nowhere. The high point, so to the high point, so to speak, is his near acrobatic antics with the ladder, which he struggles to set upright, then climbs to gain entry to his second story apartment after vainly trying to ruse his sleeping roommate. Finally, perched near the top of the unsuspecting ladder, he reels and sways as he shouts to his roommate. Just when it seems that he's about to topple over, he announces, "I'm high as a Georgia pine, but it ain't no use being too high," and descends. The acrobatics are, of course, complemented by the acrobatics are, of course, complemented by a running monologue with himself and unresponsive Richard and whoever else will listen. While dramatizing Harlem's bigotry and social decay, Souls of Sin in 1949, released by Alexander's production before the black filmmaker William Alexander joined Glucksman's All-American Company, has its hero engage in some pointedly satirical social commentary. For example, when a friend says, "I'll be back as soon as I find a job," without a hitch, he quips, "Come back anyway." Come back anyway. There are numerous instances of this type of authentic black humor buried in the crevices of the hastily produced, often shoddy race movies released in the 30s and 40s. In fact, the comic interlude probably represented the film's most rewarding moments. As most serious critics agree, the dramatic aspects of the film, usually hopelessly skewed, were their weakest component. Even when adequately scripted and well acted, the films had an eerie, chimerical quality about them. Chimerical. Let's see what that is. Probably pronouncing that wrong too. Chimerical. It looks like chimerical, but it's probably pronounced chimerical. Chimeral. Let's see what it is. Let's see what it is and how it's pronounced. Chimeral. Chimerical. Chimerical. Adjective, chimerical or chimeric. Is going with a chimera. A mythical animal formed from parts of various animals, or hoped for but illusory or impossible to achieve. The eerie, chimerical quality, scripted and well acted, the film's quality about them, a quality that I experienced firsthand as a youth. I got my first glimpse of race films as an adolescent in Ohio during the 50s. The movies were shown in my hometown's only black theater, the Regent, which, due to its abundance of vermin, were we sardonically dubbed the Rat Show. And, except for the rare presence of one of the down and out whites who, through some obviously disastrous circumstances, had become habitus of the colored section of town, played to an entirely black audience. Although the films offered a certain camaraderie and welcomed the external verification of our existence, which was absent when viewing Rock Hudson or Doris Day features. It was nearly impossible to reconcile with reality the fantastic charade of black performers acting out a scenario quite obviously based on a white world in which non-black problems and non-black reactions to those problems predominate. Most reputedly serious films from non-black producers of race movies during the 40s had simply substantiated blacks for whites in adaptations of well-trodden non-black melodramatic situations. Now, consequently, the emotional rhythms were seldom correct. The assumed priorities the assumed priorities were off key, and the underlying motivations were at best alien. It was one thing, for instance, to accept an environment composed entirely of Negro cowboys, but quite another to swallow that even in that world, heroes such as Herb Jeffries rode white horses and mouthed the same corny dialogue as Buck Jones and Roy Rogers. And although white producers may have insisted that love scenes mimic Clark Gable seducing Greta Garbo or Jean Harlow, wrote imitation by black performers usually elicited muffled laughter or loudly voiced, often obscene protestations. The Hollywood notion of romantic seduction had nothing whatsoever to do with the erotic rap used in black communities. To the majority of the working class audiences that frequented the black theaters, Borgia's Negroes would rather have attended a Ku Klux Klan meeting. Such romanticism was dismissed as lame. The answer to contemporary critics and later historians who pose questions about whether the laughs muffled inner tears of despair or whether some scenes deserved a horse laugh is emphatically the latter. Moreover, as a Northerner raised in a partially integrated community in which non-blacks were presented everywhere except in one's home or a few social clubs, cabarets, and on some occasions, theaters, the spectacle of a parallel, exclusively Negro society that depicted manners and mores. I think it's supposed to be morals, man. I've come across this a couple of times. I think it's supposed to be morals. Morals. Let me see. I think everywhere I see this is supposed to be morals, because that is definitely what in how the sentence reads. That's what it looks like. It's spelled Mores, Moors. Moors. Mores. The mores. The essential or characteristic customs and and conventions of a community. Exclusively Negro society that duplicated manners and mores. Well, I guess it's right. I'm wrong. Mores. Or duplicated the essential or characteristic customs of a community which we privately ridiculed, or Negro society that duplicated manners and mores, which shit. All over my laptop. My laptop got it. Book got it. My bad, y'all. I'm trying to clean this stuff up. Fuck up my laptop. Try to drink water. Man. Hey, give me 1 second. Let me get a towel real quick. Dry it out. All right, my bad. Shit. All right. Let's see. I'm going to wipe this shit down good right after this. All right. Water everywhere. All on my shit. All right, the mores. Negro society that duplicated manners and mores, which were privately ridiculed, was in itself laughable. Black genre movies that religiously reenacted Hollywood melodramatic scenes, scenarios, fantasies, even in white middle class society, inevitably sacrificed the cynicism, the irony, and double-edged perception that, for better or worse, still largely defined Black life. Now, as a result, for me, most of my peers and seemingly most others in the audiences, they delineated a fanciful, distorted world. They were curious, representing a harmless, perhaps less demeaning kind of minstrelsy, and were funny in a manner that their creators probably did not contemplate. The humor derived from their implicit misconceptions often eclipsed the calculated comedy provided by their comedians. But whether accidental or designed, the response echoing through the dilapidated picture show was more often than not spirited catcalls and headless, often caustic, but always riotous laughter. Humor held sway. Even the best of the period's independent Black companies sometimes reverted to standard darky types to provide levity. $1 million productions, formed in the mid 30s by Black actor, dancer, and longtime Apollo Theater emits Ralph Cooper, Black stage actor George Randall, and Hollywood producers Harry and Leo Popkin, released a number of movies that overall were well intentioned, serious, and technically superior to most films by their competitors. Among them were Dark Manhattan in 1937, one of the first Black gangster movies. The Duke is Tops in 1938, the romantic musical in which Lena Horne made her movie debut. Reform School in 1939, a drama about a mother's problems with a troublesome child, and Am I Guilty in 1940, in which Ralph Cooper portrayed an altruistic doctor who gets involved with ghetto hoodlums, and One Dark Night in 1942, which featured Matt Moreland in one of his rare dramatic roles. These and other million-dollar films generally avoided blatant coonery and farce. In fact, they were sometimes criticized for moving too far in the opposite direction. A Variety review of Am I Guilty, for example, claimed that, in endeavoring to get away from the usual obvious Negro comedy style, it risks being too highbrow. The writer went on to suggest that whereas the comparatively sophisticated audience in Harlem enjoyed the film, poorly educated Negroes in the South might prefer to see low comedy. On several other occasions, million-dollar productions did not shun the obvious or expected. Such comedians as Pigmeat Markham, Nicodemus Stewart, and Matt Moreland were regularly called on to provide some familiarly uninspired buffoonery that had no hint of either sophistication or black origins. Most companies producing black movies were even less concerned with avoiding comic stereotypes, like Jeb Buell, who, according to Thomas Cripps, exploited any gullible audience, religious pietists, Negroes, even midgets, turned out a score of mostly mediocre films in the 30s and 40s. He initiated the black Western genre with Harlem on the Prairie in 1937. The film starred Herb Jeffries as a singing cowboy and featured Matt Moreland and Flournoy Miller doing their scared coon bits, with a dark cave situated for the usual haunted house. Now in 1940, Buell teamed with Teddy Toddy to form Dixie National Pictures and release such films as Mr. Washington Goes to Town in 1940, with Moreland and Miller, and a sequel, Lucky Ghost, in 1941, in which Eddie Anderson joined the comic duo. The former was flailed by the black press, and the latter, as the title suggests, was yet another in the series of comic, scary dark farces. A raft of these predictable quickies was turned out in the late 30s and the 40s by white directors and producers such as Buell, Jack, and Burt Goldberg, Ted Toddy, Robert Savini, Bub Pollard, Alfred Sack, and Richard Kahn, who produced three more black westerns: Bronze Buckaroo in 1939, Harlem Rides the Range in 1939, and Two Gun Man from Harlem in 1940, which also starred Jeffries and cast Flournoy Miller and Spencer Williams in roles as comic sidekicks and cooks. Now, Pigmeat Markham, John Rastus Moray, Stephen Fetching, Sam McDaniel, Eddie Green, Johnny Lee, and many other comedians as well appeared as comic foils used in many instances exactly as black comics were in mainstream movies. The most genuine instances of black comedy in race films emerge in reviews or entertainment showcases, produced for distribution in theaters within black communities, and most often ignored by white audiences and critics. These shorts and features represented the only unadulterated record of the humor of many of the finest black ethnic comedians. Three pages left. Although the short films usually concentrated on music, some did feature prominent comedians. A widely distributed outtake from Heidi Ho featured the Dusty Fletcher Open the Door Richard routine. Stephen Fetching was called on to portray the unresponsive roommate in Robert Savini's Richard's Answer, which was also released on the late 40s. The comic laziest man in the world act was perfect for the role. Fetching, appearing in nightshirt and sleeping cap in this 10-minute short had merely to stay in character and deliver a monologue that approximated his stage routine. I was laying here dreaming. Everybody was trying to wake me up. Why I have such a dream like that? I ain't bothering nobody, just tending to my own business, doing nothing, resting up. With Earl Bostick and his orchestra providing a catchy musical background, the singer Flores Marmon attempting to persuade Fetchin to get out of bed and open the door with seductive overtures over the telephone, the comic dialogue escalates. A drowsy Fetchin asks, "Who's that on the phone?" "My roommate's downstairs knocking. Tell him I'm hearing him, Jones." "Rave all he wanna, but tell him I'm sure I ain't gonna open the door." Then questions Marvin, "What size hair is you got? I sort of recognize your voice, but your breath sound like you've been eating an onion." Finally, the exhausted Fetchin hangs up the phone and, lying down again, announces, "Right now, I'm gonna finish a little nap. I started a week before last. I ain't gonna open that door." In a similar manner, Pygmy Markham appeared in some short films that were essentially recreations of his stage act. One Big Mistake in 1940, for instance, was a featurette based on the slapstick routine that, according to Markham, he reworked for the camera. In this bit, the straight man approaches three comedians and offers them some advice on how to treat a woman. Two of the comics try to suggest tactic and return to announce that the advice works. "It sure does work. You got to treat them rough and make them like it." Markham's girlfriend is not so easily manipulated. When he approaches her, she says, "Boy, who the devil do you think you're talking to?" Then, in his words, "She knocks me down and beats me and kicks me all over the set." After Straight Man returns and reminds him that he was supposed to make her like it, the browbeaten Markham says, "I can treat her rough, but I'll be doggone if I can make her like it." The skit was little more than an average sample of the vaudeville or burlesque theater humor of the period, but it did display Markham's comic talent in a more or less uncompromised fashion. Markham's screen appearances, however, were at best checkered. Later in the 40s, he and John Rastus Morey also appeared in the series of Toddy Pictures features that awkwardly grafted coon cliches onto makeshift melodramatic scenarios. In the comic mystery Fight That Ghost in 1946, for instance, the comic duo literally ran through walls trying to escape the imaginary spooks pursuing them. This movie, like The Bronze Buckaroo, Lucky Ghost, and a raft of mainstream Hollywood films spotlighting frightened black comics, clearly illustrates the difference between the artful telling of a ghost story as seen in Bert Williams' stage routine or Tim Moore's appearance in McColl's Darktown Review, and the slapstick reenactment of the scared coon scenario. Not coincidentally, when similar scenes were enacted by white comedians, Abbott and Costello, for example, one member of the comic team usually resisted the humorously rendered but nevertheless craven urge to headlong flight. With few expectations or exceptions, black comedians were uniformly portrayed as being innately faint-hearted. Comedy in these instances was merely an affirmation of the mainstream conception of African American racial identity. The most unadulterated comedy emerged in race movies that showed black entertainers with little impediment for hackneyed plots borrowed from mainstream movies. Without the need to shape their humor around familiar social roles, black comedians had license to present current stage comedy with less distortion. The routines featured in Oscar McCall's Darktown Review are appropriate examples. Even in these instances, however, filmmakers, whether white or black, as well as comedians, were intent upon presenting the most socially acceptable face of black humor. The overriding theme of assimilation shaped the mass media presentation of African American humor during the 30s, the 40s, and the early 50s. Therefore, much of the cynicism and nearly all off-color barbs were excluded from motion pictures, even race films. The recent end results was the emphasis on light slapstick comedy that deliberately avoided both controversy and the kind of risque suggestiveness frequently heard on race records. Big Timers in 1946, there we almost done, as Astor Pictures, All American Pictures release starring Stephen Fetching and Moms Mabley, was among the first of these films. Now, while Fetching was free to exhibit more of the wit and trickster aspects of his darky caricature, the more clinical or cynical side of Mabley's humor, by this time, a central part of her stage act, was noticeably absent. 2 years later, Josh Benet directed two All American Picture releases, Kill Diller and Boarding House Blues, that were even less restricted by plot or storyline. Now, Killer Diller strung a succession of musical and comedy routines on a thin plot involving a magician whose disappearing act goes haywire and disrupts performances at an all-black theater. The skeletal plot allowed Benet to shoot most of the film in a theater before a black audience. Now, Dusty Fletcher stars as an inept magician and is supported by a cast that includes Moms Mabley, Butterfly McQueen, George Wiltshire, longtime straight man for Fletcher and Pygmy Markham, Nat King Cole, and Andy Kirk and his orchestra. Now, Fletcher is rambunctious and mildly suggestive as he performs a few set pieces with McQueen, but Moms Mabley is curiously disengaged here, uncharacteristically having to prod the live audience for laughter. Although its inane Keystone Cops inspired chase scenes are distracting, the movie manages to capture some of the tenor of the live stage show. Now, Boarding House Blues was also an entertainment showcase and cast Mabley as a kind of house mother to a group of struggling entertainers who are about to be evicted by a greedy landlord. Humor is more prominent in this film as Mabley, although her material is still restricted, finds room to display a bit of cynicism that marked her comedy. In addition, Dusty Fletcher does some turns on his drunk routine. A stuttering John Lee displays a comic side not shown as Calhoun on Amos and Andy, and John Spider Bruce Mason, the originator of the open door Richard bit, offers a burlesque routine in which he outwits and shames a rival for the attention of a beautiful woman. The finale, an impromptu show by the tenants, not only raises enough money to fend off the landlord, but justifies another round of comedy sketches. Man, why that sounds like that part of Friday. And Friday where they was having the party at the door to raise money for the rent that him and Day had. Day needed. All right. By the mid-50s, as the push for assimilation reached its peak and the very idea of race films loomed as regressive, studio films produced some of the last movies made for theaters in black communities. Jazz Festival in 1954 was a variety showcase presenting the top jazz artists of the day. It was followed by Rock and Roll Review and Rhythm and Blues Review, both released in 1955. These films eliminated any pretense of plot and simply presented an array of black musical and comic entertainers on stage at various Harlem theaters. Now, the Apollo Theater, Amansi, and comedian Willie Bryant introduced the acts and engaged in some between performance banter. In addition to musicians such as Ruth Brown, Nat King Cole, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, Dina Washington, Cab Calloway, Joe Turner, Lionel Hampton. The film's featured comics actor by Leonard Reed, Matt Moreland, and Nipsey Russell. Moreland and Russell offered a variety of standard stage routines in these films, including the indefinite talk bit, and Moreland displayed a comic range that was far more expansive than the eye-rolling buffoonery that he perfected in Hollywood films. Bryant, in brief routines with Honey Coles and Charlie Atkins, Leonard Reed, Nipsey Russell, and even the surprisingly funny Dizzy Gillespie was an accomplished straight man. Finally, while these variety showcases captured the tenor of black stage shows striving for decorum, they sacrificed much of the earthiness of the humor. In fact, race films generally avoided the risque elements of black humor as well as its more biting satirical overtones. It was genuine black stage comedy, all right, but it was selectively chosen. Now, although their targeted market was black, most producers of race films were unwilling to risk bringing more controversial elements of African American humor to the screen. Much of what they might have filmed, in any case, would not have gotten past the censors. By the late 40s and early 50s, black public humor, at least on stage, had begun reflecting the cynicism and frankness that characterized black street humor. Mainstream America was not prepared for that type of assault on its morality and national character, as such comedians as Lenny Bruce, and to a lesser extent, Red Fox would soon discover. It was no accident that Fox, Slappy White, and other comics whose material was more aggressively double edged did not appear in black genre entertainment reviews, nor that Moms Mabley was obviously disengaged in Killer Diller, since her usual routines were much too indelicate to be filmed. The choice of Matt Moreland, whose vaudeville and Hollywood movie experiences had prepared him for moderating his humor, and Nipsey Russell, who, according to Jack Skiffman, son of the former Apollo Theater owner Frank Skiffman, along with Bill Cosby, is the least ethnic of all comics, perfectly suited the desired aim of these films. Now, Moreland and Russell were both outstanding comedians, and so long as Russell avoided the social satire that he displayed on stage, they produced acceptably inoffensive humor. Still, black genre films left the rare visual record of some genuinely funny performances by Butterbeans and Susie, William Bryant, Leonard Reed, George Wiltshire, Dusty Fletcher, John Spider Bruce Mason, and John Rastus Moray, Pig Meat Markham, and many others. Moreover, the films presented such comic performers as Stephen Fetching, Matt Moreland, Flower Miller, Tim Moore, and Moms Mabley, to name a few, in a darker, but ironically more revealing light than that in which they were seen in Hollywood movies or later on television. Ultimately, Race Records provided a less satirized sample of early 20th century black humor than did black genre films. The recording industry was not subjected to the rigid censorship imposed on motion pictures. Now, although often banned on radio, comedy routines and songs presented on phonograph records could reflect risque or earthy aspects of black humor that were taboo in films. From such recordings as Bessie Smith's Need a Little Sugar in My Bowl, Need a Lot of Hot Dog Between My Roll, Move Your Finger, Drop Something in My Bowl, and Speckle Red's Dirty Dozens, on to such rhythm and blues recordings as Bull Moose Jackson's I Want a Bow-Legged Woman, or Hank Ballard's Work with Me, Annie, and Annie Had a Baby, Can't Work No More. Race Records regularly tapped the suggestive, bawdy aspect of black humor that was suppressed in motion pictures. Nowhere is it clearer than on the raft of the so-called blue recordings that Red Fox made. Fox was first recorded by Black Recorded Company owner Dootsy Williams in the early 50s. Now, although Williams branched out to rhythm and blues recordings, the Penguins' Earth Angel was released on his Doom Tone label, his line of risque party and comedy records by Fox. Now, Rudy Ray Moore, Hattie Noel, and others remained the company's mainstay. Fox was the company's star performer, and his body underground and race record comedy had made him famous in black communities long before Sanford's Junkyard became one of television's most popular domiciles. Now, by the 70s, Rudy Ray Moore was recording some of the most explicit and bawdy toasts and ballads from the fringe world of black hustlers and pimps. They went far beyond Fox's records. Those early records offer a sample of the most risque and often satirical comedy that many African Americans sampled when mainstream America, enthralled with the likes of Uncle Milty, considered such humor scandalous. Fox pulled few punches, spicing his stage routines and records with double entendres and focusing on the scatological and sexual in the placid 50s when the mere mention of sex was considered outrageous. What the difference between the pickpocket and a peeping Tom? One of his less explicit gags asks, a pickpocket snatches watches. Although off-color jokes, many of the locker room variety, peppered Fox's humor, he also leveled his comedy at more serious matters. On the poverty during the Depression, he quipped, my father said, the garbage man is here, and my mother said, ask him to leave a couple of bags. He also gibed about racial bigotry at the time, when most comedians assiduously sidestepped the issue. My great great grandfather, Red Fox the First, was one of the first black politicians in Mississippi. He ran for the border and made it. See, blacks have had white folks fooled for years with one word, boss. Well, good night, boss. Yes, sir, boss. Boss, spelled backwards, is double S, double SOB. And that's two of them. That's right. Good night, you son of a bitch, you. The Red Fox albums, usually kept on the back of record collections, beyond sight of polite Negro Company, were seldom mentioned at racially mixed gatherings. An underground source of uncensored black humor, these early recorded examples of comic routines and monologues popular in black cabarets and the black stage circuit were amongst the first of their kind to be made available to the general public. Although, at the time of their release, they were considered more contraband than mere race records. The albums were as essentially connected to the core or unassimilated black communities as were the original OK releases of the 20s. The only other place that African Americans might turn to see or hear public performances that matched them in authenticity was on stage at black nightclubs, cabarets, or segregated theaters on the Chitlin circuit. Those were the public arenas where black humor flourished with the least distortion. Generally, however, as Sidney Poitier suggested, non-black America had still seen only a caricature of authentic black humor. And that was the end of section 2. I went ahead and read the whole thing. We made it. We made it. We made it through section 2, which was a bunch of pages. A bunch of pages. Spilled water on my laptop. Oh, Lord. And we made it to chapter 9. I still have not checked into these Red Foxes, records, but I would love to hear them. I think they will still be funny today. I think they will still be funny today. So we'll come back next time with chapter 9. The theater owners, the booking association, and the Apollo Theater. Changing the joke and slapping the yoke. Pigmeat Markham and Mom's Maybelline. They got the pictures of them. Pigmeat Markham and Mom's Maybelline. Man, I can't believe I waste that water. It wasn't a lot of words to look up, but I sure stumbled over some, man. I was stumbling and bumbling and mumbling over some words, but we pushed through, man. I like the little back and forth between Tribal and Moore, talking about the dope and jumping out the window. I like that back and forth. I also like the parody by Eamon Davis with the preacher doing the alphabet. I also like that one. But I think they're about to get into some Red Fox stuff because they've been talking about him a lot this past couple of chapters. They've been talking about Red Fox. So I think they about to get into some Red Fox stuff, which man, come on, Red. Show me what you're working with. Yeah. But hey, like I said, man, that was it, man. That was it for this one. That was it for this section, this session of Reading with SHILO. We have finished this section, so I'm gonna have to go amend the title after this. Amend the title after this to read section 2. No part 1. All in one. But that's it for tonight, man. That is it for tonight. I thank everybody that held on and stayed with me and rocked with me. Leave a like, man. Leave a like along. That'll help the channel a lot if you leave a like on the page. Leave a comment. If it's some books you want, to be read, go ahead and leave me a comment about it, and we can see what's what. Maybe I could get a hold of that book. Maybe that book can be read at a later time after we finish some of the stuff that's on the agenda already. But until next time, man. SHILO out. I hope y'all have a nice night, evening, morning, day, whenever y'all come back and watch this on the back end. Shalom, everybody.